So it's June 17th. Thank you all for attending tonight's Pelagic presentation. We have a speaker that doesn't need much of an introduction, but yet I get to give him one. Gary Jobson is coming to us today from Maryland. We're very grateful that we're able to have these remote presentations from people that are a good amount of accomplishments inside of the sailing world. Gary has authored 21 books on sailing. He's covered the America's Cup. He's gone to Antarctica for a lot of things. He has a large number of projects that he's always working on in sailing, and I am very grateful and proud to say that we are going to now be able to hear from the man himself and hear about a lot of these trips that he's taken, including some here in the New England area. So Gary, the stage is yours, and take it away, sir.
Well, Chris, thank you very much. And it's an honor to be with you tonight. Thanks for taking the time. Chris and I talked earlier today, and I suggested I had two presentations, one that lasts about 45 minutes, the other about 4 hours. And he decided that we should do the 45-minute presentation. I will say that I think Jay Wirtz wins the prize for the most interesting background that we get to look at there. So well done, Jay. I feel like sitting on your point and contemplating life out there. So very cool. And I heard the Constitution, Old Ironsides, mentioned recently, and you may not know, it was actually a training vessel here in Annapolis at the Naval Academy. And then when the Civil War broke out, they decided they better move because Maryland was technically a border state, but there's a lot of Confederate sympathy. So they took all 130 midshipmen on the Constitution up to Newport, Rhode Island. But the ship wasn't going so fast, so they got some kind of steamer to advance it at about 7 knots as opposed to about the 3 knots that was sailing. And they set up shop on Bellevue Avenue and until the Civil War ended. So a little bit there. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about the sport of sailing, something that I have spent an awful lot of time doing, racing and cruising and expeditions. And a lot of racing people don't seem to like to go day sailing, but I do. I have this very nifty 32-foot hood boat built in Marblehead with an electric motor and a nice sail plan and an asymmetrical spinnaker and a modern shield keel. And I take 1 or 2 people with me at a time, although I line up all our grandkids. We now have 5 and sail around. And I find one of the great things to do is have a destination sail. Okay, we're going to go to this lighthouse that's 6 miles away. We're going to round the lighthouse, put the spinnaker up. That's when we'll have our lunch downwind, and the whole thing will be over in 3.5 hours. And by doing a purpose, people really like that. So here's my topics for the evening. I'm going to kick off with some thoughts on cruising. And I know a lot of you have some experience doing that. Number 2, we're going to go to Sable Island, which is off the coast of Nova Scotia, about 185 nautical miles east-southeast from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about Antarctica. I've done 3 trips south and 1 north, 1 80 degrees north in Svalbard, very interesting place, getting that far north in the high latitudes. And Antarctica, 1 was around Cape Horn, so not technically Antarctica, and then 2 down on the frozen continent, cruising on the Antarctic Peninsula. And the boat that it was on for those trips was named Pelagic, Skip Novak's boat. And Skip explained to me that pelagic is either a fish or bird that spends time in the ocean, open ocean. So I think the name of your organization is well named, Pelagic. Very cool to do that. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the infamous 1979 Fastnet Race. And then I have a little story of inspiration that it's 4 minutes long. I'll share that a little bit later. And then I'll wrap up the evening with some thoughts on the America's Cup. So we will have a little bit of racing here tonight and some cruising. Now, 2 things. One, a couple of my films, long versions, you're welcome to watch. They're on my website, jobsonsailing.com. There's no fee or anything. Just go to my website, jobsonsailing.com. You'll see a films and then a playlist. And a couple of those films I recommend are a piece I did for ESPN's 30 for 30 series on the 1979 Fastnet Race. I did a long 43-minute version on the Sable Island. I hope you'll watch that. And there's a couple other things there. Maine Boat Built is sitting there. And so anyway, I refer to that. And then one other thing, I published a book a little over a year ago called Legends of American Sailing. And I was able to do this so that every single dollar from the sale of this book goes to the National Sailing Hall of Fame, which is coming together nicely down in Newport on Thames Street. And you can buy it on their website. And I talk about 50 of America's sailors. There's 17 women and 33 men included in the book of people that have done a lot. That is my one promotion of the night. And like I said, if you buy a copy, it all goes to the National Sailing Hall of Fame. So I grew up sailing and racing on Barnegat Bay, New Jersey. And it's a very shallow place, but had good, reliable winds. And one of the greatest things I did, and when I was 13, 14, 15, I had a Penguin, a little 11.5-foot dinghy with 2 people. And I loved to go out in the afternoon. The sea breeze would be in, very few boats. Hold on one second. I'm going to have some straight gin here. Actually, it's Trader Joe's Natural Mountain Spring Water. And there's a point of land at the end of the Toms River where we live. And I'd sail maybe 2 miles to that point. And the point had a great name, Good Luck Point. And you took this point to starboard and upwind, and it was a long way down to Barnegat Light. You couldn't possibly sail there in a Penguin in an evening, but I'd go upwind for an hour and a half and then come down. And it was just a great joy to go out day sailing. And that's what I like to do in this boat. I'll show you a picture here in a little bit while. So why do we sail at all? Well, the freedom to get away from land, to feel with the environment. Our sport is great because we get to connect 5 generations from our grandparents. And I'm finding out grandkids. We have grandkids from the age of 2 to 10 who all seem to like to go sailing. It's a sport for all ages. You can do it at any level you want. It's mostly year-round, not so much up in Narragansett Bay and Boston and Maine, but frostbedding goes on. It allows you to travel the world. And I would submit that the best friends I have in life are all involved in sailing in some capacity because we all share this passion. And the friends that you make in school and growing up and in business and in your neighborhood all seem to be sailors. You get to share great stories. So while I've raced a lot, I sailed in 5 different America's Cup campaigns and did 2 Olympic campaigns and I think maybe 40 world championships or so. I've also done lots of cruising, some of them easy ones, the BVI, for example, up and down the Chesapeake Bay. I've done 17 trips along the coast of Maine with my family. I had a schooner, Silver Heels, for several years, and then a Sabre 402, very nice boats. And but like I said, I've done some pretty ambitious stuff. I chartered an Oyster 62 and took it up to Svalbard. Very cool trip, and I made a documentary for ESPN out of that. All my trips to Antarctica and Cape Horn, I did documentaries for ESPN out of that. And I've also crossed the Atlantic Ocean 6 times, although a couple of them were on a gray ship courtesy of the United States Navy. So, I've been out there quite a lot. And cruising's cool because you get to do it at your own pace. If the weather's not right, you don't have to go. I suppose it's okay to use an engine every now and then. And you get to see things a little bit differently when you see it from the water. And I find the conversation on boats when you're cruising is good. Of course, that old rule, what's said on the boat stays on the boat, always seems to apply, but conversations are really well. I've owned plenty of boats and I've chartered boats and sailed with lots of other people. And any way you can get yourself out in the water is pretty good. The nice thing about chartering is You might pay a little premium for that week or two, but then you hand the keys back and you're done. So that's pretty cool. When I go cruising, it depends on the size of the boat, but I never like to overfill a boat. So with your partner, 2 people, or your family, or another couple, if you have a bigger boat, 6, but if you get too many people, it gets crowded quickly. One of the coolest boats I ever cruised on was Endeavor up in Maine. Endeavor was the 130-foot J boat that Elizabeth Meyer had resurrected, and I got to go on it for a week. And how cool was that to wake up in the morning, get the anchor up, which a professional crew did. That was kind of nice. See the mainsail go up on a 164-foot mast on a 63-foot boom. And there I am at the wheel. We back the 2 headsails and the boat bow spins around and off we go. And soon we're sailing upwind at 10.5 knots. I got my hands on the wheel and I look up and this bird is flying over the mast. And I think he kind of appreciated the shape of our sails, which replicated the shape of his wings. And it dawned on me then how special it was with the sky and the sails and the boat connected through my hands and the wheel and the boat under my feet and the water. Everything existed as one. And I think that's what's so special about our sport, is time away from the water. If you do go cruising, preparation is key. Spend a lot of time reading about where you're going, prepare. I always have paper charts. And interestingly, Stan Honey, who I've gotten to know pretty well over the years and one of the greatest navigators of our era, he always has paper charts of the waters that he's sailing on his boat. Yeah, he's got all the electric chart systems and GPS, all that, but still he likes to have the paper charts, and I do too. I think it's a safe thing to do. Make sure you have at least one GPS and a good way to communicate. Sat phone is good, along with a cell phone and of course a VHF radio. Plenty of sun cream, the right amount of food. And one of the biggest mistakes people have when they're on the water is they don't stay hydrated. And if you get seasick, I have a great solution. If somebody's seasick, put them on the wheel for a while. It's amazing. Somebody starts steering and all that angst and nausea seems to go away. Sometimes in the Bermuda Race, I'll put a little patch behind me to hear the transtherm scope, and it works for me. I feel better, and I haven't had any schizophrenia or weird things happen, although I do have some dry mouth. You can, on YouTube, look at lots of videos of the places you're going to go and study the charts in advance so you know where those shallow spots are. It's no fun finding in North America. One time up in Canada, I ran aground. There was a buoy, and we stayed outside the buoy, and we still ran aground. I guess the buoy had moved or something filled in. So I'm scratching my head with my wife and 3 daughters that are all in their teenage years of what to do. And none other than the great Ted Hood came cruising by in one of his power yachts, and we waved, and I waved him over, and he threw me a line and dragged me off the sand up in the St. John River. And happily for me, he didn't take any pictures or anything, and it was a little bit before the internet came along. One more point about cruising: make sure you have the correct amount of clothing with you. Boots, good foul weather gear, hat, clothes that dry easily are the things that make everybody happy. And of course, if you have new crew on the boat, be sure to make sure they know how to use the head. Life is happy when people know how to use the head. So anyway, those are a few of my thoughts on cruising. All right, Sable Island. So Bill Barton, who lives in the Gloucester area, did a lecture about a decade ago or so at the New York Yacht Club about this mysterious place, Sable Island, known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. And he had some very compelling pictures of this crescent-shaped island, 23 miles from one end to the other, only about a mile wide, that is maybe 70 to 100 feet high. And more than half the island is held together by something called marram grass that has deep roots that goes into the sand. And curiously, there are about 500 horses that live on the island. And apparently in the early 1800s, horses were introduced to the island, and the generations are there. Nobody feeds them, nobody touches them, and they live there. So after seeing this lecture, I casually said to Bill, gee, if you ever go back, let me know. I'd like to do a documentary on that place. Well, it took about 5 or 6 years, but he and I communicated every now and then. And he finally said, I'm thinking about going back. I said, great, I'm going to bring a camera crew. Let's do the documentary. You take care of the boat, I'll take care of the film crew. So it took us 2 years to get permission from the Canadian government to get a permit to go on the island. Now, people go there and go on the island, but they don't stay very long. But we wanted to be there for several days and do a lot of filming. And eventually we got the permit, and we left the Royal Nova Scotia Yacht Squadron on a nice day. And we got about 6 hours out into the Gulf there, and the wind shifted to the east-southeast at about 20 knots. So it was a straight upwind all the way to Sable Island. And it got pretty windy, but by the time we got there, we anchored at night. We woke up the next morning, it was an 8-knot southerly. We were on the northern shore, so it was easy to take a launch in. And we spent 3 days on the island. Right after World War II, the Canadians built some, how would one say, incredibly modest shacks. Bring your own stuff, take it all off. So we brought a pillow and sleeping bags and filmed the heck out of the island. There's no cars, there's no rocks. We had to walk everywhere. And if you wanted to go film something 6 miles away, it was a 6-mile walk to get there, all of it in sand. But it made for quite a compelling film. I've put it in a number of film festivals. And if you just bear with me for a minute, I'm going to screen share a video here. Hopefully this works. And bear with me. I'm not the fastest internet guy, but all right. Somebody give me a thumb up if they can see it.
We're good once you hit play.
Okay. So this is Sable Island, the graveyard of the Atlantic. Populated by about 500,000 seals in the summertime. And as I mentioned, about 500 horses live on the island. They're not a big horse. They're almost pony size, but they roam the island in family groups, and the seals were curious about us. In the winter, they go all over the island, but in the summer, they stay close to the shore. The Ipswich sparrow that breeds only on Sable Island. And here it is, this crescent-shaped place out in the Atlantic, and it's low. It's the foggiest part of Canada. So you can see why there are so many shipwrecks around this island in the days before GPS. So here's a few minutes of the magic and mystery of Sable Island. So we had a Sabre 36 that Bill owns. We couldn't get too big a boat because he wanted to get close to land, and it's very tricky with the sandy shoals around Sable Island. By the way, the word sable is a French word that means sand. So it was an upwind sail all the way to Sable Island, and it took us almost 2 days to get there. I grew a beard for the expedition, by the way. This osprey came and sat on our mast. I invited him on board. He spent about 2 hours before he flew off. Anyway, they had to give him a little bit of a respite. And finally, we arrive at Sable Island. Put out the anchor light. We had 2 little dinghies to take us ashore, and we loaded up. Of course, then I learned that there are 18 species of shark around the island. Not surprising with all those seals there. And some Canadian Parks personnel were there to greet us. And we walked. I got my backpack and we walked everywhere. That's a dead seal in the foreground. We were the only yacht allowed to visit Sable Island that season. And the island's constantly changing shape with the tides and winds changing daily. So it's amazing that this island actually exists. The seals, the harbor seals, the gray seals, don't venture out very far past the surf because the sharks are out there. So they're curious about us. Got a little spooked by our cameraman here as the seals went back into the water, but they don't go too far, at least in the summertime. But like I said, in the winter, they're all over the island and you can see the carcasses. We were told don't touch the horses. They were curious about us. We were curious about them. They live in family groups and there is fresh water on the island. They can dig down in the sand and there were some freshwater ponds. The horses know not to eat the roots, so the grass will grow again. So it looks like a comfortable life. In the winter, they huddle up and stand very close to each other when it gets cold, but they're used to it. And as you can see, we were there on an incredibly nice day, probably 65 degrees out, clear skies. And it was like that for the 3 days that we were on Sable Island, which we were told is very rare. So we decided we'll take it. So this is a little village called Maine Station. These shacks, like I said, was rustic. There were some weather people out there. They sent balloons off twice a day, up to about 20,000 or 20 miles actually. And the park rangers told us about these life-saving stations, humane stations they were called, that were put there in the early 1800s. And the idea was that you would rescue people during the shipwrecks, and in return, they would claim your cargo. So you save your life. And some people would be on the island 2 years before somebody would come along and rescue them. And these shipwrecks left all kinds of artifacts around the island. We didn't touch anything. Of course, we took lots of pictures. We had 2 archaeologists aboard with us, both PhDs, studying things. To me, it looked like junk, like this old mooring buoy. And who knows where it's from or how long it had been there. There's also 350 shipwrecks around the island. This was a vessel that wrecked during World War II. The Andrea Gale, which you might remember from the Perfect Storm, foundered off the island. And Titanic sent signals through the Marconi wireless that was on Sable Island when she was sinking. Of course, that made all the headlines in the newspapers. And it must have been a tough place when these ships came ashore. No GPS, no Loran, dead reckoning. And these ships, the 350 ships, are all still at the island. But the sand covers them up. So they're underneath the sand. And you look at this legend, it's a pretty sobering sight, thinking about all the shipwrecks. The most recent one was, I think, in 1999 when a J-41 washed up. And within days, the sand covered it. And when we showed up 6 years later, look how far the shoreline is from where the boat was. And this bulkhead and a shroud was sticking up out of the sand. And that was, but we knew the boat was underneath us. Now the sand dunes are 80 to 100 feet high, covered with marron grass. Every now and then a storm will blow through and take the grass away. This was an area called Ball Dune, no grass on it. Don't think of me, think of the cameraman that went with me carrying his camera equipment, Mike Audick. And we found lots of things to explore all over the island, discovering things, clouds going by. There's a couple oil rigs off the island. There's one way in the left on the horizon you can barely see there. But the Canadians are shutting that down. And I like this seal, hey buddy, off my island, would you? Anyway, got a kind of moment. So Sable Island probably won't survive with the rising oceans. There you can see the oil rig there. There used to be many of these islands, but right now I think Sable Island's a place to be studied treasured and appreciated. So that's my little story about Sable Island. And like I said, I have a 43-minute film that you can go on my website, Jobson Sailing, and watch that. Antarctica. So here's how I got to Antarctica. The year is 1993. I'm covering the America's Cup in 1992, a year earlier, in San Diego. And I pitched my fellow colleagues at ESPN that I wanted to do a documentary on the windiest part of the world. And it didn't take much research to realize that the windiest part of the world was at the bottom of South America, Antarctica, where the wind blows gale force winds 1 day out of the 4, unimpeded by land as it whips around the Southern Ocean. But because the Andes Mountains along the coast of Chile are maybe 18,000 feet high, these fronts that come across can't get over the island, the mountains, so they whip around the bottom of South America, hence Cape Horn, and that's why it's so windy. So I made an arrangement to charter Skip Novak's boat, Pelagic, and I went down there with a camera crew and a couple sailors, 8 of us in all, and we filmed the heck out of the Beagle Channel and visited estancias. We got up on Cape Horn. It was fascinating. So the film on ESPN did well. We had a nice rating, and one of the executives said, "Hey, Gary, I really like that. What else can you do? Can you go to someplace more dramatic?" I'm thinking, what is more dramatic than Cape Horn? Well, how about Antarctica? So 3 years later, I teamed up with Skip again. We took 9 people this time, and we made the passage across the Drake to Antarctica. It's about 600 miles across. We started off at Ushuaia, a town maybe 100 miles north of Cape Horn, a resort town, kind of, and off we went. And fascinating going across the Drake. About 200 miles from Antarctica, there's a thing called the Antarctic Convergence Zone, where the water gets incredibly cold. When you cross that line, the water goes from 55 degrees to maybe 28. In other words, below freezing. But because it's salt water, it doesn't freeze. And it was mighty chilly going across. Now, the idea of the film was to do climbing and sailing, so land and the sea. And we had a famous mountain climber come with us named Alex Lowe, who very sadly, 2 years later after our expedition, perished in an avalanche on K2. Really. And one of the people with him, Conrad Anker, went to look after his widow, his wife, and their 3 boys, and ended up marrying her. So Conrad Anker is married to Alex Lowe's wife, and they've continued on. Well, Alex found that sailing in the Drake Passage was pretty tough stuff. And I found ice climbing and climbing these peaks of Antarctica to be equally tough. And probably the highlight was climbing a 5,200 foot mountain. Maybe you'd call it a hill here, but it was covered with ice on the top. And it took us 11 hours to get up. It took 8 hours to get back down. And I have never been so exhausted. The word Antarctica is interesting, by the way. When early explorers went up to the Arctic region, above the Arctic Circle, they noticed these white bears. And in Greek mythology, there was a white bear, and Greek was called Arctos, white bear, Greek. But a couple hundred years later, when they got to the Antarctic region, there were no white bears, hence anti-Arctic, no white bears. I think that's kind of interesting. And Antarctica, which is about the size of North America, holds 2/3 of the world's fresh water trapped as ice on Antarctica. And the difference between the Arctic and Antarctic is the Antarctic is on land, therefore the ice accumulates, and the Arctic is on water. So the Arctic ice is only 8 or 10 feet thick, and it melts from underneath where Antarctica accumulates. And in the center of the continent, the ice is about 11,000 feet thick. And the weight is so heavy that it depresses the tectonic plate about 1,000 feet. Well, the Antarctic Peninsula, 600 miles across from Cape Horn, opens up mostly in the summertime. We had temperatures in the 40s at times, pretty pleasant. And we got to cruise the continent. So with that, let me just show you a few clips of Antarctica. Okay. And I'll just, this is about 3 minutes. So this was shot in the days before high definition. But anyway, this is my third trip down there, and I went with the New York Yacht Club. We chartered a power vessel with 100 people. You can see it in the background. And we spent about 10 days going there. And you can see the Southern Ocean splits South America. And it's a long way from where we live here, 5,300 nautical miles from New York. And we climbed all kinds of peaks. That's a leopard seal we saw on a little iceberg, bergy bits as they're called. And the ice is loud, cracking, breaking, exploding. It always sounds like thunder. I did a little time-lapse camera going up the Gerlach Strait on a nice clear day. Looks like we're going about 40 knots, where we probably go about 8 knots. But it was beautiful when the sun was out. And you really get the sense of what it must have been like in North America during the Great Ice Age. Of course, there's lots of whales, lots of sea life, skua birds and albatross circling around. The place is really alive. The seals like to sun themselves under rocks because they're prepared for the very cold water. And the glaciers are moving into the ocean at all times. There's some chin-strap penguins. We didn't touch them at all, but we did film them. That was a still camera that we left on the rocks and let the birds come by. They're kind of awkward on land, but they're very graceful in the water. I love the way they walk. And yes, it was windy and sleety and snowy a lot of the time, but the ship was warm. And big waves. Birds accompanying across the Drake. Weird cloud formations over that mountain there. You want to be careful where you walked, because this ice could turn on you at any given time. Watch yourself now, buddy. Oops. Woke the guy up in his nap. Kind of fun. That was kind of fun getting everybody to say hello there. So anyway, that's my little piece of Antarctica there. Bear with me. Okay, I'm back. When we went there, my first trip in 1996, the next one, or 93, 96, and then 2008, there weren't too many cruise ships steaming around, but it's become quite popular. If you ever get a chance, I recommend it. You'll like it. They have these nifty ribs that you go exploring, and the only hassle is if you get bad weather on the Drake, you're either going to get delayed or it's going to be rough out there. And when we came across the Drake, we had 50 knots a few times, and on the ship it wasn't too bad, but on Skip's 54-foot steel sloop, it was quite a ride. And when I saw Cape Horn pop up on that horizon, I was mighty happy. And I did leave some birdies up in that little shack they have on Cape Horn, which I'm told are still there, which is kind of cool. All right, continuing on. So I refer you to my website again to see the Fastnet Race. I call it Ted Turner's Greatest Race. And at the end of the film, I did this interview with Ted, and I said, you know, with all the racing you've done, which one looms larger in your life, the America's Cup or the 79 Fastnet? And without skipping a beat, Turner said, oh, the Fastnet. Of course, America's Cup was a close second, but I thought that was very telling. And I got to sail a lot with Ted in the mid 70s and into the 1980s. And the Fastnet race was a race that he really wanted to win. He'd finished fourth on American Eagle, the 12-meter one time, but he decided in 1979, we're going. I almost bailed out, and he called me up at home one night. We had this little house here in Annapolis, and he talked me into it. And I went over there, and we went to Cows Week. We won Cows Week on Ted's boat, Tenacious. And one of the races we won during Cows Weeks was something called the Queen's Cup. Now, that's a big deal in England for an American boat to win the Queen's Cup. And after the race, this guy came over to our yacht, Ted's boat, all dressed up, looking like he was from Downton Abbey. And he had 4 invitations to go to the prize giving for Ted, the tactician, the navigator, and one other. And Ted looks at him and goes, but there's 16 of us on the boat. Well, we can only invite 4. So Ted takes the invitations, hands them out to the guy that looks like he's from Downton Abbey, and he says, well, you go tell the Commodore that either all of us are coming or none of us are coming. Well, about a half hour later, the guy came back with 16 invitations, which I thought was kind of fun, and it just spoke volumes about Ted Turner. So the Fastnet race is a 605 miler that starts off the Royal Yacht Squadron on the squadron line, always going with the tide. And you leave the Solent, maybe 25 miles or so, and past the Needles, famous point of land. And then you continue on the south coast of England. Now, the first hurdle is to get over something called the Portland Bill. And you sure as hope try to get across before the tide goes against you. If not, you're going to wait 6 hours. And we just got across before the tide changed. And Ted had an inkling that there was more wind offshore. So we went quite a ways out, maybe 50 miles, where most boats hugged the coast, which was a little shorter distance, but not as much wind. And that ended up being really good for us on Tenacious as we got ourselves well in the lead. Well, we crossed the Irish Sea, and we were probably an hour from rounding Fastnet Rock. I clearly remembered it was about 1800 in the evening. We're kind of trying to listen to the weather forecast, and the weather forecast was 35 minutes late. And it finally came on the weather radio and reported that there would be winds of 8 to 9, force 8 to 9, or force 10 to 11 locally. So I got out Bowditch, the American Practical Navigator, to refresh my memory. How much wind is force 10 and 11? That's a hurricane. And I'm looking at these monster waves. And Turner said at that time, it's going to be a tough night. There's going to be lives lost tonight. Well, we just had a good roast dinner and rounded Fastnet Rock about 1930, 7:30 p.m., and started upwind. And the wind came in. It was dark about 9 o'clock. Remember, you're 50 degrees north latitude, so it stays dark late, even in early August. And the wind started to build to the point that we had a storm jib and a fully reefed main, and we couldn't take it. It was too much wind. So we took the mainsail down, all the way off, down below, and only had the storm jib up forward. And the anemometer blew off the top of the mast, but it was registering well over 50 knots. Ted would not let anybody else steer other than me and him. So I steered from 8 p.m. till midnight as the storm built. And at midnight, I got off the wheel and Ted got on the wheel, and he steered the boat through the roughest part of the storm from midnight till 4 in the morning. And it was about 1 in the morning when we got that mainsail off the boat. 18 crew, all young, all in good shape. Took everything we had to get that mainsail off the boom and down below. The waves were 35 feet high. And when I got up back on the helm about 4 in the morning and the waves were still high, we were on this close reach. It was really a challenge sailing because if we luffed, we'd probably blow out the jib. Then what do we do? But if we sailed too low, we weren't going to make the Scilly Islands, and tacking was out of the question. So it's really a tricky balance. And I remember thinking, how am I ever going to describe this to somebody? Well, we got around the Scilly Islands, and by the time we finished, the wind was down to about 10 knots, and it was a long day and a half waiting for the other boats to come in. But as it turned out, we won the Fastnet race on corrected time. It was a great victory for Ted, but it was also a calamity. 15 lives were lost. 23 boats either sank or were abandoned. Of the 303 boats that started that year, only 87 actually reached the finish line. And as a direct result of that race, there was a good hard look about safety regulations. The safety at sea seminars came out of the Fastnet race, and regulations got tighter, communications. And in those days, we didn't really have good weather reporting from satellites. So I'm not sure the race committee knew. But I was quite heartened 2 weeks ago, Memorial Day, when the Storm Tricycle Club decided to cancel the Block Island race when the forecast was going to be 50 plus knot winds at 2 o'clock in the morning on the backside of Block Island. I was scheduled to race the thing on a curved 50-footer, and I was mighty glad not to go. I'm thinking, I'm 71 years old, going out there in 50 knots of wind? I don't think so. So anyway, some thoughts on Fastnet. Please check out my website, Ted Turner's Great Race, and it's a 13-minute piece. The BBC was on strike during that Fastnet race, but lucky for me, I had a Canon camera, and I took exactly 100 photos throughout that race, slides, and putting the film together. I spent time with the Royal Ocean Racing Club, and the BBC had gotten some film from the Royal Navy and helicopters. They charged me a fortune for it, $50 a second. But anyway, I paid it, got 3 minutes of it. And it really helped the film. So I hope you'll watch it. All right, next up, I got another little piece here. Let me screen share here. Bear with me. Okay. All right, let me set this up. I'll start up with this picture. That's me in 1967, 17 years old. I was into three things. That was my car, a 1940 businessman's coupe, a Packard 120, which I paid $400 for after teaching sailing all summer. I liked basketball, and I was into the sport of sailing. So the year now is 1970. I'm going to start this film. And a big regatta was coming up this weekend. But 4 days before the regatta, a disaster. The horrible event in Kent State happened. Whoops, what happened here? Oh, there we go. Sorry. This regatta was coming up this weekend. It was the Mid-Atlantic single-handed champs, and the top two boats were going to get to go to the nationals in a place called California. And I'd never been to California. And 4 days before the regatta is when Kent State happened. And I look back and I'm thinking of this horrible event that happened, and I was thinking about sailing. The night before the regatta, the New York Knicks were playing in Game 7 of the NBA championship at Madison Square Garden. And the Garden had a policy that if you showed up in uniform, they'd find you a nosebleed seat. My father always advised me, give the usher a generous tip. And the usher came out and said, we're all full tonight, sorry. But he squeezed my elbow. He remembered the tip and he said, you wait. And he took me and sat me behind the bench of the New York Knicks. And I sat next to an actor, Dustin Hoffman. Not very tall guy, by the way. And it was an exciting thing. And the New York Knicks at the time, I was very excited about. And they won the basketball game and the NBA championship. And after the game, Dustin Hoffman and I went running with the team into the locker room. That's Howard Cosell. That's me with hair in my uniform, short black hair, cadet at the New York Maritime College. Very cool to be in there. And I got all the Knicks autographs. Very cool. Still have that piece of paper with the box score on it. And it's something to remember. And by the way, I was so inspired by those Knicks. I went out and won the regatta. I think I won 11 out of 16 races. And yes, I qualified to go to the national championship out in San Francisco. 33 years later, however, I'm laying in a hospital bed at the University of Maryland Medical System going through a bone marrow transplant for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I was mighty depressed. And this nurse came in and she said, Mr. Jobson, we got to get you sitting up. Let's see if something's on television. She starts channel surfing, and there on television was the game from 1970. The Knicks versus the LA Lakers was on TV. I forgot about the disease. I watched with great interest, and guess what? The Knicks won again. And after the game, on the TV, they went down into the locker room to get the post-game interviews, and there I was on television. And I remember, I got an autograph a few years later from Walt Frazier, the guard that did so well that night. And I remembered at the time how that inspired me to win that sailboat race. And there I am behind Willis Reed. I'm 6'2". Look at the size of this guy. And that was the moment that I decided I'm not giving up with this disease. I'm going to fight. And I'm sure glad I did. So I can get out sailing today. That's a IOD out in Nantucket. And one of the reasons that I'm inspired was to help other people. I chair these boards I've been involved with and volunteer a lot of my time these days. And one of the coolest things that's happened and why I'm smiling is the 5 grandkids that our 3 daughters have produced over the last 10 years. And one of my great joys is taking them out sailing. So anyway, there they all are. 2 of them live in Cambridge, Mass, by the way. The 2 boys in the upper right, they're now 10 and 5. So anyway, that's my little story of overcoming adversity. So I hope you enjoyed that. Are you all from the Boston, Providence area? Is that? Chris, is everybody from?
I'd say a majority of them are New Englanders in the Boston, Metro Boston, Rhode Island area. But we do have a lot that are from farther away.
Got it.
Or a few that are from farther away in Florida.
Well, I sure hope in my lifetime.
Barbara knows better than I do.
Yeah. I sure hope in my lifetime we see the America's Cup back off Newport, Rhode Island. By the way, my daughter, with 2 of the grandsons, she lives in Cambridge and she's got a really cool job. She's the director of admissions at Harvard Law School. So she's pretty active up there.
Nice.
All right. One more topic tonight. The America's Cup. Someone once wrote that the America's Cup is a synonym for things brave and big and famous. To those words, I would add one more: spectacular. No inanimate object is more beautiful than 2 America's Cup yachts racing bow to bow, sailing for glory and into our affections. And this regatta, the America's Cup, has sure fascinated me since the age of 8 in 1958. I saw a little footage of Columbia sailing against Scepter that year. And my family took a vacation up to Rhode Island in the summer of 1962, 12 years old. President Kennedy had been there a week earlier. And I'll tell you, the sight of Weatherly and Gretel being towed out to the starting line, all the crew wore uniforms. We didn't wear uniforms in Barnegat Bay and Penguins and Sneak Boxes and E-Scows. The mast towered up into the clouds. I was awestruck. And what a miracle for me. 15 years later, there I was in one of these 12 meters with Ted Turner, and 1977 was a magic year for us, and we ended up winning the cup. Over the years, I ended up sailing on 5 different cups, and I covered 9 more for TV. Although for the 2021 match, I was a spectator. I watched every race on TV. I'm not sure I liked the boats, and I missed the match racing, and I missed the 12 meters, but it's still the America's Cup. I do think the people from the past, like Nathaniel Green Harrisoff or Harold Vanderbilt, or even John Cox Stevens, who had a catamaran, by the way, in 1851. I love the name, Double Trouble, in 2 holes, Double Trouble. They might have been intrigued by these foiling monoholes. On the one hand, the boats were fast and they were intriguing. On the other hand, it just didn't seem like the racing that I kind of equate to. So I followed the thing with great interest. Let's see here. And I had great hopes that American Magic might actually win this. And in the early rounds, in something called the Christmas Regatta in December, they looked pretty good. They won 4 races. They lost 2, but they beat New Zealand in 1 race. So I was hopeful. But their performance went downhill after that for many reasons. And it was a disappointment. And the worst part is when they capsized in 1 race, and I don't think they ever recovered. So I'm a student in the America's Cup. I've written about it, talked about it, sailed in it, spectated in it, raced in it, everything you can imagine, been on all kinds of boards. And I guess my one technical thing I did for both 2017 and 2021 is, as a member of the board of World Sailing, the international governing body of the sport, I negotiated the sanctioning deal between Larry Ellison and World Sailing for 2017 and Grant Dalton and the Italians for 2021. So with that, I'm going to share the screen one more time and show you a couple highlights from Auckland. All right, bear with me. I want you to know I'm kind of proud of myself. I'm actually pulling this off. All right, here we go. Well, there's the America's Cup, dates back to 1851, and this was the 36th defense. Auckland is called the City of Sails for good reason. Everybody and his brother and sister are into the sport of sailing. The race course was not far from the city front. It was about 1.8 mile legs. They would go around 3 times, 6 legs through these gates. And the races only took about 25 minutes, although there was a 40-minute time limit. And when there winds, these boats were speedy, sailing along at 35 knots or more. Of course, when there was no wind, they were no fun at all. There were 4 teams: New Zealand, led by Peter Burling, Olympic gold medalist, world champion in the 49er and Moth class, probably the best sailor in the world today. Jimmy Spithill led Prada Pirelli, Luna Rosa for the Italians, longtime veteran of Cup now. Ben Ainsley, 4 Olympic gold medals, led Ineos UK, the British boat. And Terry Hutchinson and Dean Barker represented the United States aboard American Magic. So like I said, I was really hoping that American Magic would find a way to win this regatta. And they started off okay. So here we go to the Christmas Regatta, and it's American Magic at the top up against New Zealand. Everybody's wondering how they're going to go. American Magic got the start. Nice. Did a good job staying up on the foils. All the mechanics seemed to work pretty well. And on the 3rd beat, New Zealand caught up a little bit, but still American Magic won. So perhaps a good omen. The Italians had all Italian crew except for Jimmy Spithill from Australia. The American crew, only about half of them were Americans. The others were from Great Britain and Australia and New Zealand. There's Dean Barker at the helm, not looking particularly comfortable. Terry Hutchinson was a tactician, the skipper, but also a grinder, 52-year-old grinder. I'm not sure that was the best move, because when your head's down grinding, how do you see where you're going? When you're the tactician, you got to watch. Kind of interesting devices. Spithill looking a little more steady at the helm. Now, this was the bad moment in the semifinals when American Magic rounded the windward mark. They got a puff of wind. I'm not sure why they tacked. Dean Barker looking kind of nervous, and the boat literally launches up out of the water and comes crashing down hard. The boat came to a stop, kind of freaked out the shore crew and the coaching boat. They went over to help out, and American Magic went over the side. Now, they were leading this race by about 40 seconds, 20 boat lengths. The boats go one boat length every 2 seconds. And here's another look at it. So it's not, I'm not sure why they tacked, but now you got the helmsman and tactician on the leeward side of the boat, and watch it launch. I'll just watch here. The foil came out of the water, and they got a hole in the hull. And if you look on the right underneath, you can see the shards of carbon fiber hanging down. There it is. And to their credit, the other teams all sent their chase boats over to lend a hand. And they got some high-powered pumps and blew up some balloons. Another shot on board. So they spent 13 days patching it up. I kind of like the tribute with the Band-Aids on the side. And they did a good job getting that boat back in the water. They had ruined their electronics. They'd ruined their hydraulics. They had to borrow stuff from their tune-up boat. Meanwhile, the Italians defeated the British, and American Magic was out. So Spithill lost to Burling in Bermuda 7 races to 1. So Spithill has gone from Larry Ellison's team, and now he's with the Italian team. And